Welcome in, everybody, to yet another edition of What Is My Voice Doing? Apparently, it's coming up here now. This is Sad Times. I'm your host, Kevin. Welcome. Thank you for joining us. For those of you who have never listened to Sad Times before, here's a quick primer. Sad Times is a show in which we have kind and generous guests who come on each week, and they talk about times they were upset, sad, angry, times that they faced some changes in their lives, where they talk about where they came from and where they're going, and sometimes how that is a very terrifying prospect. It's just something that we all as humans go through on a day-to-day, month-to-month, year-to-year basis, but don't necessarily always talk about. The goal here is to let these guests tell their story. It's not to judge it or to diagnose it or even to try to fix it. It's just to hear their story so that you at home or, in the Fourth Hand podcast studio, wherever you may be, are able to hear this and maybe then feel that you could share your story with somebody that you see and feel a little less alone. So that's Sad Times. We do have ourselves a nice little website. It's called a website. It's sadtimespodcast.com, and we will have the link to that in the show notes. And there you can reach out to be a guest, which is how our wonderful guest today, who we're about to introduce, came to our attention. She reached out to us, and I will let you know that anybody who comes on, the main rule of Sad Times is the guest decides 100% about what we talk about, so that it's not always the easiest stuff to talk about. So we definitely make sure that we understand what you are and are not comfortable talking about. So please take a look there. We are all also on Amazon Music now, the podcast. So if you are an Amazon Music listener, please download, follow, LOL. I don't know what the kids do. So all that stuff. And let's get to our sponsor, and then we're going to get to our wonderful guests. So this week's sponsor is the Ted Cruz Travel Agency. Do you work in what was once the greatest deliberative body in the history of man, but is now a sideshow act that no one respects? And while working there, do every single one of your colleagues and constituents hate you with a passion? And when you come home from the Senate, does your family recoil at the sight of you? Not to worry. At the Ted Cruz Travel Agency, we can whisk you away from your cares, worries, and responsibilities all the way to Cancun. We only service Cancun. Prices and participation may vary. That sounds like a pretty good deal. I might have to check that out. Wade, if you could just reach out to them for me, please. Thank you. All right. As always, please support our sponsors. If you do, please use the code FAKE. That's FAKE at checkout. And let them know that you came here. All right. Enough of that bullshit. Let's get to our wonderful guest today. It is a woman named Teale. Teale, how are you doing?
I'm doing good. Thanks so much for having me.
So I want to say this too. Obviously, right now, nobody can see us, but you have a beautiful, you're outside with some trees behind you. Where are you?
I am in Oregon.
Ooh, wow.
I'm at a park. I'm at a park that I have to clean the bathrooms at every day. So it's not always the prettiest place, but where I'm at now is.
I appreciate that we're not recording in the bathrooms. That's good. That's good.
Agreed.
Now, Teale, you and I are from the same lovely town in central Illinois. And we were, you graduated what year, 2002?
Yes.
Okay, so we were 2 years apart. We were both in the marching band. I played the tuba. What did you play?
I played the flag. Played the hell out of them.
Oh, you were, I'm sorry. I didn't realize, I'm sorry. You were in the color guard. Okay, gotcha.
Oh, yeah.
I loved marching band. Did you enjoy it? Or
I hated marching band.
Oh, good. And that's what we're going to talk about today. No, I'm just kidding. Did you do it all 4 years?
No. So I did 2 years, but my second year, the day we got back from band camp, I blew out my knee. And so I had to stand on the sidelines at attention for the entire season.
Oh my God, I remember that now. That now. You poor person.
Yeah, I just had to stand facing the audience for 15 minutes doing nothing.
So was that ever explained to the judges or why you were there? Or?
Well, we probably did so well because I was standing on the side instead of participating.
Oh, now come on. Well, and I think we're going to get to it a little bit later, but we went on a trip together to Disney World, and where we left that lovely Central Illinois town, and on charter buses. Was it one or two? Just one, I think.
I can't remember. Peoria charter, though. I remember the big red bus.
Was it Peoria? Okay.
Yeah.
And we rode those suckers down, and it was a long bus trip. I enjoyed that trip. That's where we all were when it turned January 1st, 2000.
Yeah, the year 2000.
Yep.
My family was terrified something terrible was going to happen.
Were they worried about like Y2K?
Exactly. Yeah.
I think we all were a little bit. Brent's got like 4 Y2K related tattoos, all on his neck. They aged very well.
Pretty hardcore.
So we are from the same hometown, but as I said, I didn't know you very well in high school, even though we had a pretty small high school. I mean, when we were growing up, it was 4,800 people in that town. Tell us about kind of your early years and were you always in Monticello?
Pretty much. So my family and I moved to Monticello when I was about 4, I think. I was living with my grandparents at the time. My bio parents were young and not really well equipped to raise a child. And so from the time I was born, pretty much, I was with my grandparents.
Okay.
They relocated to Monticello, I want to say like 1988, probably.
Ooh, just 1 year after the sesquicentennial.
Just missed it.
Just missed it. Okay. And so they basically were, you lived in their house. They raised you, basically, is what you're saying.
Yeah. So they were my primary caregivers. When I was maybe 7 or 8, they actually adopted me. So they're my father's parents. So my paternal grandparents, which interestingly enough, fun fact, when you're adopted, you get a new birth certificate.
Really?
So I have 2 birth certificates. My original one from when I was born, and then when I was adopted, you get a new one with your adoptive parents' names on them. However, my biological father has a birth certificate with the same parents' names on it. So by law, when I was adopted, my dad became my brother.
Wow. Central Illinois, baby. That's crazy. So let me ask you this. Like, if you were to apply for a passport, or which document would you use?
You use the most recent one.
Gotcha. I never knew that.
Actually,
that's cool.
I had to get a passport, and I couldn't find my updated one. So I had to request it because I didn't want to give like false documentation.
No, I wouldn't advise that. That's not a good idea. What did your grandparents do?
So my grandfather, who I call Poppy. So when I refer to him, that's who that is.
Okay.
He was in the military for like over 20 years before I was born. And then once I was born, he worked for like Social Security or something, like some government office.
Sure.
So he had an office job. And then my grandmother, who I refer to as my mom, she was a stay-at-home mom mostly. So she was really just sort of raising me and doing the stay-at-home wife and mom thing.
Awesome. Did you have any siblings that lived with you?
Not that lived with me. So I have 7 siblings. I'm the only child between my parents. So they either have a different mom or a different dad than I do. And so they were raised either with their parents, their biological parents, or some of them were actually in the foster care system and then adopted out of the family as well.
Gotcha.
So I've known some of my siblings my whole life, but didn't know some of them until adulthood because of that.
Gotcha. Okay. Growing up in the small town, did you know, a lot of people, they grow up and they're like, for example, when I was 4, here was my fucking bright idea. I was going to be a baseball player in the summer and an actor in the winter. And then I get hit by a pitch in baseball, and I was like, forget baseball. I mean, I love baseball, but I'm not playing it anymore. Did you ever have a time in your life where you're like, this is what I want to do?
Yeah. So, I mean, when I was young, I think, like most little girls, you want to be a veterinarian. But by the time I got older, my biological dad, he had a number of addictions. And so it was kind of in and out of my life through the years and in and out of rehab. And when I was about 14, he went to rehab for the last time, and was able to, actually be sober for a period of time. And seeing how that, people that worked in that field were so helpful to him, I decided that's kind of the direction that I wanted to go.
Specifically, like with addiction and rehab and things?
Yeah, to sort of work in substance abuse treatment, because I felt like that was something that I was grateful that was there to help my dad, my bio dad. And so I wanted to help other people do that too.
Okay.
And so that's pretty much what I wanted to be until I was almost ready to graduate from college.
Well, what changed?
Well, so when I was a teenager, coming home from that aforementioned band trip, I came home to the news that my dad had actually passed away, my bio dad.
Oh.
And so being given those 2 sober years, especially sort of ingrained in me, like, this is what I want to do. Like, even though he died at 38 years old, like he got to get sober and I got to experience that. And so graduated high school, went to college, had that on the brain the whole time. And then my last semester of college, I did an internship in an inpatient substance abuse treatment program. And while I loved the work and I loved like getting to see people kind of break down their walls over time, it was a 28-day program. So just as soon as people would start to kind of open up and work on doing some healing, it was time for them to go home. And I didn't like not being able to help them beyond that. So I decided that wasn't what I wanted to do.
So a couple questions about that. It was 28 days. Was Sandra Bullock there?
It would have been more interesting if she was.
Yeah.
But sadly,
fair.
She was not.
And then the other question is, did people have to leave due to insurance constraints? Like the insurance is like, we're only going to pay for this long, or the actual program was 28 days and then you just weren't part of the follow-up?
Correct. So the actual program was 28 days. So essentially with this program, there's basically a 4-week curriculum that just you are working through with the group of people. And then after 4 weeks, you're restarting that curriculum again. So week 1, day 1, this is the topics that are discussed. Week 1, day 2, these are the things. And so that schedule just sort of rotated. And no matter where someone was when they were admitted, they just jump right in. And because they're only there for the 4 weeks, no materials being repeated during their stay. So
Gotcha.
Then the idea probably would be, to continue with outpatient care, but the internship I was doing wasn't involved in that. However,
go please. No, go ahead.
I was going to say, however, that kind of sparked my interest, and maybe I want to work in like outpatient mental health instead of this inpatient option.
Gotcha. And I want to call out here too. I think it's really admirable and really cool that you're like, hey, I saw this work for my dad. I want to do that. I want to help the same way that this helped me and my family. I just think that's really wonderful, and that's awesome. So
I think that's kind of what we all want to do, is like when something impacts us, we want to make that impact and like help others achieve those things too.
I think that's true. And would you say that you're a pretty big empath? I believe the term is empath, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I would absolutely say that I'm a huge empath. I mean, probably to a fault. I feel what other people are feeling. I, identify when other people are struggling. I'm also kind of a people pleaser though. So I tend to want to help to resolve, if people are having struggles. And so, sometimes that's not always what people want. They don't always necessarily want their problems solved. They just want someone to listen. So being an empathetic helper has evolved through the years, because I've realized, in trying to always want to help with other people's problems, then my own kind of got pushed to the back burner.
Do you think that almost subconsciously, though, it was a way that you could be like, well, I'm helping, just say Kevin, I'm helping Kevin over here. That way I don't and I'll deal with my stuff later. So it was a way that you could be the person that you want to be, but also kind of not deal with the other stuff. Or do you think that did not play at all?
I definitely would agree with that, but I would say that I wasn't even aware that I was doing that because I didn't want to deal with the other stuff. I mentioned I was raised by people that weren't my biological parents. I had a parental death when I was 16. But in my mind, I didn't see my life as being traumatic. So I didn't even acknowledge until more recently in life that these traumas were occurring. I was just sort of blind to them and focusing on what I could do to help other people. I didn't think that I needed any help necessarily.
Is it almost that you're like, well, this can't be traumatic because I lived through it? Was it kind of that, like, well, my life can't be traumatic. Other people's can, but mine can't.
Absolutely. In my mind, I would kind of just justify the life that I had as being like, well, I didn't face abuse or neglect. I was raised in a 2-parent household. We were middle class. We didn't have to worry about where our next meal was going to come from. So I would just kind of minimize those things that were actually probably pretty big traumatic things. I just would look at the cup half full all the time.
Okay. So you decided you wanted to go into mental health. And as an empath, as you've described yourself, and, let's just call it an 8-hour workday. That doesn't mean it always is, right? But in an 8-hour workday, you're taking on, in a mental health role, often, you're taking on the problems of others and trying to help them solve them. And then the work is done, but as an empath, was it really hard to shake that day off and then go, not to say that anything was wrong with it, but just to be like, okay, now I need to think about myself. Was it hard to make that transition?
Absolutely. So I mentioned that I decided I didn't want to work in the inpatient substance abuse treatment. What I ended up doing for much of my career, for over a decade, I worked in outpatient mental health, working with people in the community that had pretty severe mental illness. So again, even though I take medication for depression, anxiety, even though I have my own things, I was working with people that were, in my mind, they needed so much more assistance. At least my life isn't as bad as, these folks that need these supports. So I was always more concerned with, are their needs being met? Making sure if they're healthy, and that doesn't turn off when you go home from work
right.
all the time. And so my clients that I worked with through that decade, really I was like a sibling to them almost. We would spend so much time together, and I was sometimes the closest to family that they had. And so when they were struggling, even though I wasn't on the clock anymore, I still would, be worried and have them on my mind and things like that. So it definitely is. Go ahead.
Sorry, was there a way that you would be able to communicate with them, outside of quote unquote the 9 to 5 hours?
So what I did is not necessarily what everyone in the profession will do. But because I had worked with my clients so long and knew them very well, my clients did have my personal cell phone number. But they were very respectful as far as knowing, like, I only use this if it's a true emergency. I certainly wouldn't give it out to folks that I knew couldn't have those reasonable boundaries. But yeah, that was something that sometimes, at 10 o'clock at night, I might get a phone call because somebody has to go to the emergency room and I need to walk them through like how they can get there and things like that.
Wow. And when you took where was this job?
It was actually in Monticello, the town we both grew up in.
Mm-hmm.
So it was it goes by the center now, but it's the Piatt County Mental Health Center.
Mm-hmm.
They provide amazing mental health services.
Agreed.
And I was lucky to get to be able to do what I did for so long. Because even though sometimes work did come home with me and I worried about folks after hours, it was also very, very rewarding. And those relationships that I formed, I still think about the folks that I worked with and, the funny stories and stuff, even though I haven't seen them in years. They're still, I still think about them and hope they're doing well.
And I'm sure they do the same with you. And yeah, I echo that. I mean, just wonderful people doing a wonderful service to the community. So you were doing that work. And then you also, you got married. Now you got married before you started that work or in the midst of that work?
So I started at the center in early 2009. And I got married in August 2009, actually on this day that we're recording.
Yes. Happy anniversary.
Yeah, thank you.
So
I had worked in other like local social service organizations short term between college and between my job at the center. But having that job at the center when I lived very close and grew up in the area, basically I have spent my entire life within about a 45-minute radius to that hometown until now.
Was that a strange balance to achieve, where you're doing really meaningful work within the community, but you're also trying to have your own identity and maybe be like, hey, yes, I know I grew up here, but I'm a growing person. I'm a different person. Was that a difficult thing for you?
Absolutely. So, number one, having a unique name makes people remember you, even if you're not in a small town.
True.
And so going to school like K through 12 in the same community that I'm living and working, teachers and classmates and classmates' families, like everyone knows you, it feels like. And that can be somewhat difficult if everyone knows you from, especially the time you were little and, the family you came from and how you were raised. But you kind of find yourself trying to fit into a mold, kind of that mold that they have seen you grow up, and that they think that they, know you really well because they've known you your whole life. And sometimes that would require that I kind of wear a mask as far as not voicing my opinions about things publicly, not commenting on, the current political climate, because I wanted to be able to express myself and my beliefs and have people kind of know what I thought. But because of my role that I played in the community, which was very public, it was a government job. So it was, there's always people that are going to be seeing you in the community and seeing what you're doing. So I wanted to be as people pleasing and tactful as possible, which then, and make other people weren't offended by what I would say or think badly of things that I did. That kind of led to me not really getting to be my true self to the rest of the world. So there was Teale that was out in the community who was friendly and, liked everyone and always nice. And then there was Teale who sometimes just wanted to tell people to shut the fuck up.
Yeah, right. But then with that role and yes, I can totally understand what you're saying. And so you got married, you're trying to balance this role, and you're trying to not ruffle feathers, as I think the saying goes. Did that, especially as an empath, and you're really giving a lot of yourself every day to your clients and the people that you work with, did that have an effect on you in your relationship, like when you would come home for the day, et cetera?
Sure. So I've always, I've always kind of said of my marriage that like life is hard and life is shitty a lot of the time, but like our marriage has always been the easiest part of it, which I think is, what anyone would strive for in a relationship. But, we had some really difficult times in life early in our marriage. My husband had a lot of surgeries, a lot of medical stuff. For the first 7 or 8 years of our marriage, he had at least a surgery every single year.
Wow.
And so with that, came time off work, which, then you have financial strain and debt like everyone has. And so, like I said, life would be crappy, but we always handled our marriage really well. And so those challenges and those hurdles didn't impact our relationship, but add on to that, just normal life stress that we're experiencing, plus the stress from work and all of the people that I'm caring for. Sometimes in the evenings when I would come home, the last thing I would want to do would be to even communicate
Yeah.
with my family, because, I had been doing that all day long.
Yeah, it takes a lot out of you.
Yeah. So it's kind of, I use the analogy of like a pitcher of water. So if you start your day with a pitcher of water, you're pouring glasses out to everyone throughout the day, whether that's your significant other, your children, your job, friends. And then at the end of the day, when you come home, like if your pitcher's empty, then you die of thirst, basically, because you've been giving it all to somebody else and not giving anything to yourself. And I was finding myself more and more like that at the end of the day, towards probably early 2020, before COVID and everything. I was already feeling that way.
Well, luckily in early 2020, everything turned out fine for everyone. I'm just kidding.
Right.
So early 2020, you're
everyone.
And how long had you been in your job at this point?
At least a decade.
Okay.
So about 10 years, probably.
Okay. So you're feeling, to use your metaphor, the pitcher of water is becoming, it's drying up. And
right.
What were you thinking then about your job and where you lived and kind of, was there a bit of a crisis of what do I do next, or kind of what kind of went through your mind then?
So prior to 2020, my husband and I had vacationed several times in Oregon and kind of set the goal that one day we'd like to move out here. We didn't have, a plan necessarily. But when 2020 happened, everything was just kind of flipped upside down. And we had a lot more time on our hands to do some planning, because of, staying home and quarantining and things like that. So we started to really dig in and do some research on relocating and also on full-time RV living. So, and this is coming from someone who's not camped a day in her life, but it was something that we both thought would be something cool to do. You can see others doing it on social media and kind of read about their journeys. And so we thought, you know what, like if we can figure out how to make this work, let's do it. And I was feeling really burnt out at my job. I never saw myself necessarily leaving the center. Like if I still lived there, I probably would still be doing what I was doing. But with the chaos of the world at the time, we thought like, well, why wait? Now seems like a good time as any.
Did you own an RV at that time, or did you have to purchase one?
We did not. No. So the thing we did was we purchased a truck, because you have to have something to pull the RV. We have a fifth wheel now, which you tow behind a truck. So the first thing we did was get a truck. The second thing we did was list our house, and so we had been preparing to list the house. That takes a long time when you've lived somewhere a long time. You just accumulate so much stuff.
Oh man, isn't that the truth?
Yeah. So we listed our house in July and had been kind of eyeballing different trailers and fifth wheels. And it was essentially a purchase that we were going to wait until our house sold, because we were going to take the equity that we had in the house when we sold the house and then buy an RV with it. And so we actually, a friend was selling hers, and it was in great condition. We got a great deal on it, and she was even willing to kind of store it until we closed on our house, which we did at the end of November 2020. And about a week later, we hit the road in our RV. We sold everything or donated it, with the exception of a storage unit that still sits in Monticello with some stuff in it. But other than that, we left with what we could fit in our RV, and we hit the road.
How scary was that?
Terrifying.
Why was it terrifying?
Everyone always will tell me like, oh, you're so brave for doing it. But like, you can be brave, but still scared shitless. And that's basically kind of how the last couple of years of my life have been. When we hit the road, because we had never owned an RV, there's this whole gigantic thing that, you're going to have to repair and learn how to do different things with the rig, as RVs aren't built to live in. So when you're living in it, the wear and tear is a lot greater.
Sure.
And so you have to fix things a lot sooner than you would in a house. I didn't know how to tow it. So I've still never towed the thing. But just knowing that, like, oh, if something happens to my husband and he's not able to drive, like, I don't know what to do with this thing.
Yeah.
And I was leaving the only home essentially that I had ever known. I was 37 years old, I think, and I had only ever lived within about 45 miles within central Illinois. So, leaving behind friends and family and not having a job that we had some savings from our house, and the goal was Oregon, but we wanted to travel a bit first. And so we did that for a couple months. But then traveling is expensive. So we were kind of spending money quicker than we expected. And so we decided we better find a new home base in Oregon. And one of the things that a lot of people in the full-time RV community do is they will do work at campgrounds. So they call it work camping, or you can, a lot of positions are volunteer, where you will volunteer 20 hours of time, but then you get to park your RV and live full-time there.
When you say volunteer 20 hours of your time and work, what is it? What kind of work is that? Just cleaning up, or what does that mean?
Yeah, so I can only speak to what my experience was, but we actually were chosen to work at an RV park that had an ocean view on the Oregon coast. Absolutely never thought that I would live on the Oregon coast, but the opportunity presented itself. And so we had like a weekly schedule, that hours that we would be available. There was at some parks, there's like a live-in caretaker that lives in a house on the property. And so that person was kind of like my boss. And so between myself and another host and him, we basically have to have someone available at all times in case campers need something, in case someone needs firewood. Then there's daily cleaning, daily trash removal, cleaning bathrooms, things like that. Just everybody sort of all hands on deck to make sure the park stays beautiful and that campers are happy.
Okay. And were you actually right on the ocean?
So our location was in Florence, Oregon. And so Florence is actually most well known for the sand dunes.
Okay.
So like the movie Dune was actually inspired by the author of the book. Well, I said movie, but it was a book first.
Frank Herbert. Yep.
Yeah. So he actually spent time at the Oregon dunes, and that was some inspiration for some of the like geographic types of things. So fun fact about Florence.
Wow. I didn't know that. Okay.
Yeah, but our park was actually right where the Teale River meets the Pacific Ocean. So Florence is really more of a river town. The Teale River travels through town and is actually literally right behind me where I sit right now.
Okay.
And so where it runs into the Pacific, that's where our park was. And so from my front door, I could see, it was probably a mile to walk if I wanted to put my toes in the water. But it was ocean view from the front yard.
Did you ever get used to that? Or was it every day you're like, oh, Jesus, this is beautiful?
Every day for probably a year, I had to pinch myself. It was so hard to believe that this plan that we had hatched actually was working. I mean, I didn't expect failure necessarily, but I didn't expect the ocean. So, I would every day just have to remind myself, like, you deserve this. You deserve this. I would literally say it out loud to myself because it didn't feel real.
Would there be another voice of some sort in your head
So
saying that
if that,
you didn't deserve this? Is that kind of what you're saying, or?
um, so not necessarily, I mean, not necessarily that I didn't feel deserving, but it just seemed too good to be true.
Mm.
Um, and so it felt like, there had been so many struggles in life, up till then, that I was always waiting for the other shoe to fall, essentially, waiting for the catastrophe or the disaster that would, make it not be real.
Gotcha. Okay. And then was your husband working on the campground as well?
He did for a little while. So when we first moved, we both just, it was winter time. And so winter in Oregon tends to just be very rainy on the coast. So we had some savings still, and we could make it on very little at the time. Um, so it wasn't until we had probably been in Oregon about 6 months. That is when he found other employment offsite, just actually down the road at an oceanfront hotel, which he now runs the maintenance department there.
Hey, all right.
So yeah, kind of got his foot in the door, and that way we had some additional income coming in. Because I mean, there were months that, I went to the food bank because we didn't have money things are very expensive out here too. So we didn't have money to necessarily pay for groceries. I got on Medicaid, all of these benefits that I always had helped other people in my job with. Now I was the one using them. But that's what they're there for. And I felt like I had paid my dues. And if I needed that program, then that's what I needed for the short term. And so, it was things were tight there for probably 6 or 8 months. But if you want something bad enough, you make it work.
Yeah. So I wanted to ask you, as things are, tight and difficult money wise, et cetera, were you questioning every day, like, what have I done? Like, did you have, on top of the, you deserve this, was there also like, oh man, things don't feel as safe as they did when I had the 9-to-5 in the house, et cetera, et cetera? Was that a struggle for you, or no?
I would have expected it to be, because I'm a person that likes to plan. I like to know exactly what's going on. I like to be prepared. And the lifestyle that we were living in Oregon didn't really afford that all the time. For instance, living in the RV, as things break, you're having to fix them and, kind of put out fires here and there, not knowing, we were pretty confident that we would be able to remain in our position at the campground, year after year, as long as we wanted to. But as the months went on, we're kind of hoping like, oh, if this doesn't work out, what can we do instead? That's the planner in me.
Mm-hmm.
And so, there were times when it felt like I should be worrying more. But the longer that I was kind of adapting my lifestyle to this new geographic location, I also kind of mentally was realizing more just about myself as a person. And I guess I also had a lot of the time to think because I wasn't going to a 9-to-5. And so it's also when I kind of started to begin to process some of, this trauma that had happened in my life growing up that I had never thought was trauma. But I think because I actually felt like I was in a safer space geographically where other people weren't going to judge me or, have this preconceived notion of me, it felt safer to explore and work through those things, to kind of start healing and letting the version of myself out that really had just been pushed down by the atmosphere and the environment that I had grown up in.
So in that peaceful situation where you do have some time to think, isn't it nice when there's time to think? Now, it's scary for me because sometimes I think too much, but is that when you kind of realized, oh, I really did have these traumas, whatever they may be. And then do you feel like you were embracing is not the right word, encountering them for the first time? Like you were actually dealing with them for the first time?
Yeah, absolutely. So, having this time and this, location where I was living pretty anonymously. So like I could go out and nobody's going to know me because I don't know anybody. um, but that also kind of gave me some time to just sort of reflect on, growing up the way that I did and just the family dynamic that I had and, um, kind of getting the freedom or learning how to have the freedom to tell those that had caused kind of some pain in my life, letting them know like how it had made me feel and that, even though this might have happened 30 years ago, like I'm just now working through it. And I don't feel like I can fully heal until I let you know how your actions impacted me. So for example, my bio mom and I have exchanged some letters because I find that is sort of an easier way to sometimes work through the tough stuff, is getting to like write your thoughts out uninterrupted. And so, my mom and I, bio mom and I have sort of exchanged letters, and I've been able to, kind of tell her this is how I felt when I was younger. And then she's also been able to share with me, when we're kids, we don't really get that our parents have feelings, but she was able to kind of share with me how those same circumstances, made her feel from her point of view. And so unfortunately, a lot of the people that I would love to be able to do that with are no longer living. So that becomes difficult too, because you sometimes can't get closure or healing from your trauma if the people that caused it aren't here anymore. Or if you do get healing, you have to figure out a way to do it where you just have to be okay with not being able to tell them how their actions made you feel.
Right. And you have said a few times, I think you've described yourself somewhat as a people pleaser, and as somebody who's always been a people pleaser, and then you're kind of making this transition, you're really encountering some things, and you're reaching out and expressing how things made you feel. Was that did the impulse to be a people pleaser, did that almost hold you back from being able to express these things?
It definitely made it harder, for sure. So, and I think that's why I find like writing the letters a little bit easier, because then I can kind of get my thoughts out, digest them. Being a people pleaser means that I also sometimes don't express myself fully because I don't want to hurt someone else's feelings. So that's pretty much growing up that way. I wouldn't want to hurt, bio parents' feelings, but I also wouldn't want to hurt adoptive parents' feelings. So a lot of times I would just kind of keep things to myself and bottle things up, because I didn't want to cause pain to someone else, even though it was causing pain to myself.
But I imagine you didn't realize. You're like, no, or do you think you ever had the thoughts like, well, I don't want to cause said person pain, so I'll just take this on. And it feels like, small little minute pieces, but that stuff does add up. Did you ever realize that it was adding up, or was it only until you had some space and time to yourself with your thoughts, getting away from that 45-mile zone that you, in which you grew up, like that you said, oh, okay, that did have an effect on me?
Yeah, so I think that I was starting to kind of realize some of these things prior to leaving Illinois. As when my adoptive parents passed away in 2011 and 2014, I was tasked with like cleaning out their home of 30 years.
Wow.
So after doing that and sort of, finding letters between my parents and finding documents and learning a lot of things about my parents that I didn't know when they were alive. That kind of started the ball rolling as far as me, realizing like, okay, there was some dynamic going on here that did really impact how the adult that I've grown into. But now these people aren't here for me to process that with them. And so initially it kind of felt like, well, this isn't fair that, I'm just stuck with knowing all of this knowledge that was kept from me. How am I supposed to deal with that? Well, I had a lovely therapist out here in Oregon who kind of helped me figure out, how to get closure. Like you don't necessarily need an apology from someone to get closure.
Right.
And sometimes that's not possible. But there are ways that you can arrive at acceptance without an apology, basically. And it can be hard to do. And I wouldn't say I'm all the way there still.
Sure.
But I definitely have really dove in the last two and a half-ish years that we've been away from Illinois. I've picked up some hobbies that I put down. When I was a teenager, I loved to like paint and do crafts and things like that. And,
so you do a lot of painting now?
After some, I dabble a little.
Mm-hmm.
But it's not for me. It's not really about the finished product. It's about the process and like how I feel when I'm doing stuff.
And how do you feel when you're doing stuff? What is the feeling that you get? I'm sorry that I keep interrupting you.
Oh, that's okay. Yeah. So I have a very anxious mind, and it will run 1,000 miles an hour sometimes. So even though I'm a recovering people pleaser, I still worry about, if I have an altercation with someone, or a conversation where like I had to be confrontational. I don't like to do that. So after the fact, I'll just be like replaying it in my head and what could have I said differently? And essentially worried about like what those people must have thought of me. And so when I get those moments, being able to just either doodle or paint or draw, I like to do like repetitive things. Do you know what mandalas are? So
no, I don't.
So mandalas are like, they're typically round, and it's like a pretty pattern. It's like repeated patterns in a circle.
Mm-hmm.
And so they're pretty to look at, but they're also, because you're repeating patterns when you draw them, it makes your mind kind of focus on that instead of all of those thoughts that were running through your mind.
Sure.
And so when I have those times when my brain is just full of gunk, that's what I like to do to make it makes the thoughts go away, and all I'm focusing on is, this pen and paper that's in front of me right now. And then at least for whatever amount of time I'm doing that, I've got the quiet mind and can sometimes then reflect afterwards and be able to reevaluate the situation I was worried about with sort of a calmer mind.
Okay, gotcha. And sorry, and I had interrupted you. So you said painting, crafts. What other hobbies have you kind of gotten back into that maybe you were doing as a teenager?
So I also I have old lady hobbies. So
do you cross stitch?
I do cross stitch sometimes, and I crochet. I actually crochet, like it's kind of a little side hustle. Like friends and family, when they see stuff on the internet, they'll send me a picture and be like, "Hey, can you make this?" And so I'll make a little money on the side doing it. But those are kind of the main ones. And it's helpful. Usually when I'm doing those, I'm like listening to music or listening to an audiobook, just stuff that will kind of activate my brain in a different way to focus less on what I was obsessing about and anxious about, and just kind of clear my head that way.
And I imagine being in such beautiful surroundings helps with that as well.
For sure. So I live so after we hosted on the Oregon coast, we actually weren't looking to relocate elsewhere in Oregon, but the opportunity was presented to us, was offered by the county, which is the campground we had been working on, was a county property. And so we got the opportunity to move about 20 miles from the coast or inland to this big, like 15-acre property it's not a traditional campground where people would drop by and, tent camp or RV camp, but it's more of a location that people can rent the entire camp. So 4-H camps, church camps, weddings, things like that.
Okay.
So I have that 15 acres of property at my fingertips at all time.
Wow.
We get to live in a house on site. And so I take care of, the maintenance and the cleaning and dealing with the public, with the groups that come in and stuff. So year round, I have, this beautiful atmosphere at my fingertips, which is awesome.
Have you learned a lot of maintenance related things between the RV and then kind of the work that you're describing now and at your previous campground? Like, did you know how to do all this stuff, or have you kind of learned on the fly?
No, I didn't know anything. So the RV stuff, my husband he's very handy, and that's still his wheelhouse. When we were in it, he would take care of that. But now at our location that we are now, since he still works off site and now I'm the one that's in charge, if something breaks, like, I got to figure out how to fix it. And because I'm a person that likes to be prepared and likes to know what's going on, that can sometimes be difficult for me because I'm not a plumber and I'm not an electrician and I don't know how to fix lawnmowers, but all of these things are broken and I have to figure it out. So there have been a lot of tears
Sure.
in the last, 6 months while I'm trying to figure shit out. But I'm learning, and the parks staff. So I'm considered an independent contractor, and then there's county park staff that also do some things. They've been very kind in teaching me, kind of how to do some of the maintenance things that I don't know how to do. So I am now a plumber and a lawnmower mechanic.
So you could actually, if I were to say, I don't know, Brent lets me use the studio if I mow his lawn, is basically how this works. So I'm just kidding. That's not true at all. Brent is very kind and generous. If I had a broken lawnmower, to a degree, I could just be like, hey, Teale, if I FaceTime you, I could be like, what's going on over here? Do you think you would have a good chance of helping me with that?
Absolutely not.
Oh, damn it.
Absolutely not.
Well, shit. All right, then that's fine.
I know enough to turn it on and how to make it go if it's not going. And that's about it.
Okay. And how long have you been on the 15 acres that you're describing?
Since the 1st of December of 2022.
Wow. Okay.
So our season is just April through October. So we don't have guests on site in the winter months, but I still get to live there and basically have that as my home with no visitors for 6 months out of the year, which is pretty amazing.
Yeah, that is amazing. And obviously, so you're, let's see here, coming up on 3 years outside of what the big change, the big decision to leave. How do you feel? I mean, it sounds like it's going pretty well.
It is going well. I'm actually returning to town, to Monticello in October for a visit.
When?
And it will be the first.
Okay.
It will be the first time that I have been back since.
How are you feeling about that?
I mean, I'm excited for some things. I have a niece and a nephew who I miss terribly and have grown so much. So that's probably what I'm most excited about, and seeing other family too, but mostly them.
Well, the town square is still there.
Is it hopping?
Always. Always.
So, but they put those stop signs up, so now you can't.
I don't even want to talk about those fucking stop signs, man. When those started going up, I was like, what has my life become? Because I got hit when I was in second grade. I got hit because I was an idiot, and I was like, ugh, and I ran across the street, and I got nailed by this poor high school. I don't even know who it was.
Oh my gosh!
That he just hits this little pipsqueak second grader, and I get thrown. And that poor guy probably was like, oh my God, oh my God, oh my God, oh my God. Luckily, I was totally fine.
in a few weeks talking about his trauma. Of
Right.
hitting
There
a
you go.
child.
There you go. So even as you're out there and you're dealing with it, obviously, as you said, you're still working through it. I think what a lot of people assume or maybe at least tend to think, oh, well, I fixed this problem with my mental health. It to me, in my experience, it's never that. It's managing it. So as
Absolutely.
have you still been dealing with that anxious mind, depression, et cetera, even though you're out there and you're doing exactly what you wanted to do?
Definitely. I mean, just because your location changes doesn't mean that your shit changes. So, being in a different location has helped me focus on myself instead of all of the other people in my area. Friends, family, acquaintances, strangers. I'm not really worried about what their thoughts are now. Whereas 3 years ago, that was all I was worried about, was what people would think of me. Putting a good face forward so that people would think highly of me. And now I don't give a shit. Like, if you don't like me, you don't like me, whatever. But being able to, as much as I love the mental health profession, being out of the mental health profession has allowed me to fill my own cup, like I mentioned, and not having to take care of as many people. I mean, I've always been a caretaker, and so not having to be the caretaker and the fixer allowed me to kind of focus on my own stuff. But I definitely have anxious days or like stressy and depressy days, and I know that they won't last forever, so I try to occupy my mind in doing some of those creative things that we talked about. But it's definitely, it gets easier, I found, over time, to kind of confront these things and work through them.
Yeah, that's a big thing for me too. Again, I'm sorry to interrupt, but I totally agree with it. It's not like everything, again, you're not going to solve it, but it's not like, oh, one day all this stuff works now. It's step by step, small, not TGIF step by step, starring Patrick Duffy. It's like small incremental steps, and then those steps become a little easier, I've found. And
Absolutely.
then the same way that we're building up certain things that may cause us pain, we're also building up things that are helping us heal.
For sure. Sometimes I have to put self-care on my to-do list because life will get busy and I will, have all these other tasks around the park that I need to do. And I'll start to feel, be feeling the racing thoughts and stuff. And then I'll realize, you haven't taken any time for yourself in a few days. And so sometimes it goes on the to-do list to make sure it gets done.
When did that become something that started to recur on your to-do list? The self-care items, I mean.
I would say that I've done that throughout my adult life. In increments. So if I'm going through sort of a depressed period, then those things probably aren't on my to-do list.
Sure.
But then, I realize as I do those things that I guess one thing that we called them in some training that I did was like a wellness toolkit. And so if you imagine like you have a little toolkit, like, with your hammer and your screw and your drill, but instead of tools, you've got like wellness tools. So the things that you do when you're at your best that make you happy. So for me, that might be reading or drawing or listening to music. Like knowing what's in my toolkit and like naming them when I'm feeling good helps. Then when I'm feeling not so good, I can look at this list and be like, all right, these things make you feel better. So we need to do one of these things today.
Yeah.
Would be, that would be stuff that I would teach my clients about too, is identifying those things that make you feel better mentally and bring you joy. And if you have to put it on a list and reference the list, then that's what you got to do.
Out of curiosity, what's some stuff that you like to read that that relaxes you or what have you?
So I'm kind of a 50-50 audiobook versus like actual book reader.
Okay.
most of the things that I've been reading lately have been sort of like whatever's in the bestseller fiction. Although I go to the little free libraries nearby, and I picked up a book that I read the back of it, and it was, sounded like a romance. But that was a spicy little book. So from time to time, I read the spicy little books too.
What do you care to share the title, or would you rather not?
I honestly don't even remember.
Okay, that's fair. Was it the Bible?
That's not enough spice for me.
Oh,
sorry.
That's fair enough. Fair enough. Okay, so as we're wrapping up here, Teale, I want to say a couple things. You said earlier, and I'm going to probably misquote you, even though you just said it. Just because you're brave doesn't mean you're scared to death. Agreed. But I want to praise you and your husband for the decisions you made and commitment to go out and say, you know what, I'm going to do it this way. This is what I would like to try. And sticking with it, even as, financially it didn't seem to be working out, as, you're running into RV problems, all that stuff. I just think that's a really admirable and cool thing. And I commend both of you. And I think that's awesome. So as we wrap up, is there anything else that you would want to impart that maybe you didn't say or share or anything of that nature before we close out?
I mean, I don't necessarily have anything further about, my sort of story, but I just commend you for having these conversations with people. I think it's awesome. And I especially think that men's mental health isn't talked about enough. And so I love, listening and hearing everybody's stories. I think you're doing a great thing here.
Oh, well, thank you very much. And
Sure.
I appreciate it. And again, it was such a pleasant and lovely surprise when I opened it up and saw that you had reached out on the website. So thank you so much for reaching out.
Absolutely.
It's an inspiring story. I appreciate your honesty, your vulnerability, and everything. And I think it's so great that you two are doing so well out there. And again, as of this recording, happy anniversary to you both. That's really wonderful. And I guess I will close the same way I always do, which is just a reminder that there is always room for kindness and grace, even with ourselves. As I say every time, I forget it all the time. I forgot it about 100 times today, but I'm going to keep trying. There is always room for kindness and grace, and we will see you next time on Sad Times.
You've been listening to A Fourth Hand Joint.